Hi guys, Garage RC back on another video. Today's video is a triple test with the XRX DPA Sport by Techstorm, DRZ version 2 by Atomic, GLD rear wheel drive race by Gyro Racing. So these are all rear wheel drive drifters, and this is a lot of information to get through today, so I'm going to try and summarize as much as I can so this video doesn't end up being 2 hours long. In summary, they're all 94mm. DRZ version 2 comes with adjustable wheelbase, but you need a smaller servo to make it 90mm. These two don't come with adjustable wheelbase, but you can get an option to make them adjustable from 90 to 98 without having to change any servos. Width-wise, so the width of these cars, as tested, I'm going to give the rear track width because the front track is variable. Let's see if we can do this on camera. So the GLD, sorry, let's reset that. Rear track, sorry, 72.5mm. DRZ, 67mm. DPA Sport, 71mm. Front track for each car. Obviously the front track is variable depending on what wheel offset you use and what body shell you're using. But as tested for the body shells we're using today, we're using a Ferrari 360 GTC on the GLD. And center to center, we're about 67mm track width on the GLD. DRZ version 2, which is running, I think the narrowest setup here, but that just came down to the body shell, 66mm. The Techstorm DPA Sport is running 69mm. This car does come with the Techstorm DPA Sport does come with a slightly wider setup. So if you're going to use standard mini Z bodies, you may need to use less offset wheels. So for example, with this Subaru shell I'm using, really instead of using the 2.5 offset, I needed a 0 offset to make it fit. That's just something worth bearing in mind. You can adjust this if you need to, sand a bit off the plastic ball ends to make it narrower if you want to, but the setup itself as it comes out the box is pretty good. So in terms of width and wheelbase, that's what we're dealing with here. In terms of build, what comes out the box, this one includes speed controller, gyro, motor and receiver depending on which setup you go for, and the servo. No wheels, no body. DRZ version 2, this with electronics version, gyro, servo, speed controller, but you don't get the motor or the receiver. GLD with electronics, you get the servo, the speed controller, you don't get the gyro, receiver or the motor. So that comes with the least in the with electronics section. In terms of what I've used in each car, I will give a list below. Everything's listed on my website for all these cars. The DRZ version 2 isn't on there yet, but will be coming soon. I'm just trying to get the supplier to sort me out some stock. But I will list each car's features on the website if you want to know what's included and not included. But in terms of what I'm running here, 8,600 kV GL Racing Gyro, 6,000 Surpass Hobby Motor, 3,500 kV Techstorm motor that came with it. I know the GLD's got quite a high kV GL Racing motor, but I found them to be very reliable at low speed by turning down the endpoints. So it makes for some interesting high speed drifting, which I will show later on. Okay, so that's in terms of what you get with the cars. In terms of how they arrive, Techstorm is partly built, so the rear gearbox, front gearbox, pretty much everything except the electronics is on. You have to install the knuckles and the suspension. DRZ version 2, the build was pretty straightforward. A few issues with the steering, which I'll come to in a moment, but otherwise it was easier than DRZ version 1. GLD, this was controversial because I didn't really have any problems with the rear gearbox, which a few people did. Credit to GL Racing and HRC, they've sent out parts straight away, and I got the replacement spares, metal gears for the car. And the other issue was with the front turnbuckles, which I didn't really experience because I use my GLA ones, but I'll talk about in the steering section in a moment. So in terms of build, easiest, next easiest, hardest, but it wasn't that difficult. I thought the DRZ version 1 was way harder. So let's talk about the steering mechanism. GLD uses a rail system, which is pretty good. As you can see here, it runs on ball bearings and is pretty easy to adjust from a screw underneath here, and gives a pretty good range. Now, one of the things I don't like about the steering mechanism on this car, and generally the front end on this car, is it feels a bit flimsy. Now, that delicateness is also what gives it its precision, but I don't like it. It's a little bit too much give, but that's my only criticism. Once you get past the issues that we had with the plastic turnbuckles, where the these end joints here, the ones that came with the car were very stiff, and having seen other videos, I decided to use my GL Racing ball joints, which were exactly the same size but had no issue whatsoever and were very smooth. So I know GL Racings have sent out loads of spares for these now, so maybe it's just an initial run quality problem, but getting past that, the actual system itself works well. The steering range is good. I know there's an option you can do, a hack to adjust the bulkhead to give better steering range, but my car doesn't seem to need that. It has, as standard, the range was pretty good. So I was pretty happy with the steering setup on this car. DRZ version 2. Okay, this is the only thing I didn't like about this car, really. Well, there's a few things, but I did like the fact that it came with standard metal knuckles, alloy knuckles. I don't like the bell crank steering system this car has. I think it's a step backwards from the DRZ version 1. I think it would have been better if, when they designed this car, maybe if they were going to use a bell, have the screw come through the top deck and just give it that extra stability so there's less give. Because as you turn this, if the ride height isn't just so, which I'll come to in a moment, you can see the crank is hitting the inner arm. So I had to adjust that. Even with the wheel here, it was catching. So yeah, and also I think I'll mention, as per usual, Atomic didn't include some of the washers that were necessary for the kits to provide spaces, but I've come to expect that from Atomic, but that was the only thing missing, so that's not too bad. So I'll come back to the ride height in a moment and when I talk about the suspension setup. XRX, this has got my favourite steering setup. The servo is centred, as is the GLDs. The DRZ version 2, the servo is offset to the right, which I don't like so much. This has a centred servo on metal mounts, and I like the steering mechanism. Very simple but effective. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So the servo has a parallel arm attaching here, and it uses a rail system on ball bearings, just like the GLD. It gives great steering range, which pretty much out of the box I had no issue with. One of the things I'll mention this car has, which is also very good, which the GLD definitely could do with, is some stop pins, so you can't overturn the steering and jam it if your end points are too high on your servo. And they are designed seamlessly with the steering system. They actually are. If I zoom in and show you, I'm sure other videos will come out to explain this in more detail. The actual ball joint and arm are all one, that metal rod there. Very efficient, and you can see the steering mechanism is very nice. Simple but effective. And you can adjust, there's a screw down here, you can adjust through the chassis. There's a space to get through, and there's a screw at the bottom you adjust to adjust the tension. So yeah, let's zoom back out. So both the GLD and the XRX have a rail system, which I like. Moving on to the suspension. Okay, suspension setup on these cars. So both the Atomic and the XRX here, the DPA Sport, both have adjustable shocks. The Gyro Racing comes with shocks with clips to adjust the ride height. I actually like having the clips. It makes it very easy to adjust the shocks, especially if you're a newbie. That makes life very simple. So that's both the So only the GLD has that, but the adjustable shocks are better in the long term. Right, okay, now this is my big bugbear with these two cars, both the DRZ2 and the GLD. Neither of them have ride height adjustment at the front. There's no screws in the wishbones to set the ride height, which means you have to use the spring settings, spacers or shock settings to get the ride height correct. That sounds fine in theory, but once you start having to play around with that, it can cause issues. Say for example, let's just say you want to set your ride height a bit higher because of the surface you're running on or the body shell you're using, whatever reason. That means you have to add in more spacers here. Now what that means is then if you set your ride height higher, now I'm just using the extreme example here, maybe not as low as this, but it means then that you're compressing the spring more and there's more tension, so you've got a harder setup. So if you want a lower setup with a soft spring, softer suspension, you'd have to use a softer spring or cut the spring shorter to allow for the fact the spacers are putting tension on the setup. The other issue I had with this is that you really have to make sure the suspension is very free to get the best out of this car. Any stiffness in the suspension or steering in this car, due to the rather flimsy nature of the front setup, which does give it precision, but also makes it very prone to any binding whatsoever, and you're not going to steer properly and you're not going to drift neatly both ways, both directions. DRZ2, so same thing, no vertical ride height adjustment at the front. So for this car it's even more important because the steering binds unless the ride height is exactly 2mm off the ground, which is about here. Your steering is going to catch. So what I mean by that is, I'll turn it, I think I showed you earlier, but the wheels won't go to full lock. If I do that, they're actually jamming. You can hear it just there. You have to have the wheels at the right height. So this car could do with a ride height adjustment. XRX has got the ride height adjustment, which makes it very easy to set the height of the car and then adjust the shocks with the adjustable shocks. Very easy. I don't know why Atomic haven't gone with that for this, because the DRZ version 1 had that and I like that. Okay, none of these cars come with standard caster adjustment, although on the XRX you can adjust the caster because there are spaces in the kit you can use to put washers either here or there, and that enables you to move the arms forwards or back, and that will give you some caster adjustments. So there are small washers in the kit. As you can see, I've put two, one here and one here, to set the caster back. There's no option to do that on these two. You have to buy the optional upgrades to adjust caster angle. So that again is a negative. Electronics, the speed controllers on all of these are exactly the same. I'd say they can all be programmed by the Atomic or Geo Racing program card, and they all seem to have the same setup, so they're all equally good. The gyro on this one, it is a newer version 2 gyro, which these cars now come with, but I did test it with the standard gyro settings, so this is not in advanced mode, it's in basic mode, and I have used this car with the standard gyro and it performs. This gyro is no different, so I don't think that's going to skew the test. The Atomic gyro are very good. Geo Racing, this cute little gyro down here, excuse the mess of wires on this car, again very nice little gyro, works great, very neat, very small. So the motors, 3500 kV, that's the motor that everyone goes for drifting. 6000 Surpass Hobby, 8600 kV Geo Racing motor with the endpoints turned down to give a similar performance. Motor mount position, GLD, you can adjust the motor mount position so that it can have a high motor mount. Same with the XRX. I don't think you can do that with the DRZ version 2 with what comes out of the box. That does give more options. Also, the battery holder for the GLD I like. Very simple, slide your battery in, close the door, very nice, very neat. You can also use standard Atomic batteries with the GLD, no problem, they fit fine. You can't use a Geo Racing battery in the DRZ version 2, it won't fit. The XRX you can use both, the battery holder, you can angle a Geo Racing battery in, or you can drop in a standard Atomic battery, which actually fits lower, but that works just fine. That's a very brief overview today of each of the cars and what I did like during the build process and the basic setup. I found the XRX the easiest to set up, and I found the DRZ2 the hardest because of the steering jamming. I found the GLD the most fiddly, not because of anything jamming, but because of these turnbuckles. You literally have to take them off and tighten them by hand rather than try and turn them in location because they will just pop off. So that's what I think in terms of setup for these cars. All of them have the same rear setup. All of them have rear ride height adjustment. So that is what I could have done with on the front on these two. Okay, let's move on to some actual drifting now. Enough talking. Let's see how these cars perform. We're going to do different tests. I'm going to do a test which is more of a skill small course, and then I'm going to do a big sweeping corner with a straight to see how these cars handle distance drifting. So here we have the GLD with the Ferrari 360 GTC body shell. Here I'm just pointing out how the wheel angles affect the grip, how well this car is actually composed. As it goes around, you can see that it still manages to maintain contact at every part of the wheel. So the outer part of the wheel takes contact on the inner wheel as it goes around pretty well, and you can see the outer wheel, the inside edge, is contacting pretty well. The suspension was very pliable and worked pretty well, and despite being the widest car tested here in terms of the setup, it was still pretty manoeuvrable and very easy to twist one way than another. It felt very light almost. I mean, in terms of weight, I think it was the lightest, but again, I'll do a weigh-in just to confirm that. The car really did perform very sweetly, and despite not having the best drift wheels on, although I think the wheels themselves look gorgeous, I meant the tyres, I really wanted to test these wheels out. Sorry, I've had them lying around for a while for this car, and it really does look pretty cool. So yeah, the handling was good, it was sweet, and the car performed very nicely. It was easy to take into bigger circles, smaller circles, switch the other way, and it stopped on the spot as well. So on the whole, the setup, despite the initial misgivings I had about the suspension, worked fine, and the car is supremely balanced. Remember, this has got an 8600 kV motor, and I've just turned down the endpoint, and it is easy to control around this circuit. As you can see there, the inside of the wheel is taking the grip as the car sort of turns to one side. But yeah, amazing stuff from the GLD. So now we've got the DRZ version 2. Now, despite all the problems I had with the initial suspension setup and with the steering catching that upper wishbone, this car was very easy to get the hang of. It didn't require any kind of time to get used to it. The moment I picked it up, I could drive it, and I could easily get it to do the course pretty quickly. So it obviously is a well-balanced car. I just need to tune the suspension and work out the kinks that it's got. Still not happy with the design of the crank, and I think later on you'll see in the long drift test it shows up a bit more that can be an issue. But on this small circuit, it was brilliant. You can see the wheel lifting just there with the suspension not being quite balanced enough. Now, I know it's the inner wheel that steers more than the outer wheel, and it certainly didn't seem to affect its performance on this circuit. But it did bother me that I was getting that unevenness in the suspension, that the wheel was lifting. Whereas on the DRZ version 1, I would have just adjusted the ride height screws to even that out. Here I have to play around with the spring settings and the suspension shock settings to get that right. Okay, otherwise the car glides beautifully, and I think being the narrowest for this particular test is easier. It seems to want to manoeuvre quite well. So finally we've got the XRX, which is also pretty wide, but again shows its pedigree here, supreme handling, and it was the easiest one to keep sideways out of all of them on this course. It did seem to enjoy getting sideways, and by that you can see from the steering angle there as it goes around, it really does utilise the grip on all four wheels, and the suspension works really well. So in terms of which one I preferred, I think I'd have to give it to the XRX. I really enjoyed driving this car on this circuit. It was a lot of fun. and you can see from the slow motion footage how the front end guides it around literally on rails. So yeah, I think even when it takes a knock, it keeps its composure. Looking at this video here though, I think I could do with lowering the front ride height. The wheel arches looked like they had a lot of space in there, but I'll go back and play around with that. And I think ultimately this car is set up pretty well now. I'm happy with it. I'm not going to do any more adjustments to it. I think I'll stick with this Subaru body shell. Seems to set it off quite nicely. I like seeing the blue of the chassis plate underneath there. But yeah, I think everything about this car was pretty straightforward. This didn't require any real tuning other than just getting it to fit the body shell. I was pretty happy. The first time I actually turned it on and gave it a drift, straight away it was performing as it needed to. Okay, this is a good shot here. You can see the suspension working. You can see, even though it's a smooth surface, the suspension is absorbing as the car turns sideways. Brilliant stuff. Okay, so I think later on I'm going to compare this to the DRZ version 2 in the long drift section. Okay, so here we are, long drift corner test, XRX first. So this is only a 3,500 kV motor, which is normally what people use for drifting, but I think this car can handle a lot more, and I'm looking forward to switching it up and putting the 8,600 kV motor and see how it handles. I was pretty easy able to maintain sideways posture on this, and certainly here you can see it's not providing any difficulty at all. It's really predictable and will come out the slide or go into a slide as and when you want it to. So here you can see it's going sideways, and the wheels are, you can see the DS racing wheels there spinning as it goes around and guiding the car around. And as I come out the corner, I can go left or right, the car will just follow. Really smooth, really predictable. So I think, based on what I can see here, you know, this car is being thought about. Every section of the design is to help it drift, and I think just playing with it was a lot of fun. I think I kept going over and over again. I've got more footage of this car than any of the others purely because I enjoyed racing it so much. I kept running it backwards and forwards, just trying to get a different angle and a sweeter line. Okay, next, DRZ version 2. So from this footage it might look like, okay, you can see the steering moving a lot here. That's not me doing it, that's the gyro. So the gyro was playing a big part in getting this car around the corner. Now it was following around quite easily. It wasn't difficult to drive, but it was hard to get it to drift in a straight line. As you can see, the steering's the gyro is doing a lot of work. So it's functional. You saw the front end vibrating there quite a lot. It's functional, it does the job, it gets around, but it didn't like these long drifts. So I think you could say, okay, it's on a narrower setup, it's going to be harder for it, but I think it needs the front suspension needs looking at, and maybe the monoshock will take care of that. I'll make another video about it. So is it better than the DRZ version 1? Now, initially I was having a good old moan about this car, and I would have said the DRZ version 1 is better, but I think this is more balanced. But I prefer the way the front steering is set up on the DRZ version 1 in terms of adjustability. But in terms of balance, I've got to say the car is pretty smooth. It does, not smooth so much, as you can see it's wobbling, but it does go around the corners as you want it to. Okay, next up, now this was interesting, GLD. It felt very light and very fast, and it almost felt like I could drive it in a straight line, like a rear-wheel drive, like an all-wheel drive, sorry. And there was a lot of power as well. You could really power it straight if you wanted to. You didn't have to put it sideways. But what I actually enjoyed doing was giving it the power, getting it to go fast in a straight line, and almost handbrake turning and putting the back end out and then controlling the slide, rather than trying to drift it continuously. And that was just really quite intoxicating. I kept doing that over and over again. But you can see this car is balanced, and as it's going sideways, the front wheels are steering. They're not wobbling with the gyro. They're actually very stable, you can see there. And the car is following around, and I can make adjustments on the fly, as you'll see here. Just missed the corner, and that's something normally I can only do with a good all-wheel drive, but this rear-wheel drive is very well poised, cat-like I'd say, very well balanced. So a different feel to the XRX completely. Okay, for this video, little short clip now, I've just got the two cars running by side. So you can see the DRZ wheels wobbling side to side as it tries to stabilise with the gyro, whereas the XRX is smooth. So after seeing all the tests and driving these cars and using them for the past month or two, I've come to the conclusion that my favourite by far is the XRX. It's got a sturdy build quality to it. It looks amazing. I like the double deck arrangement. I like the servo arrangement. I love the solidness of the wishbones. The general durability of it looks good. I like the adjustability, how easy it is to set the ride height at the front and the rear. I like the way the battery compartment handles any size battery, and it's fairly secure. And generally the way the car handles, it handles brilliantly. And as you can see from the footage, the sideways action is something else. It really does track sideways beautifully in the slow motion footage. You can see that, whether it's over a short or a long distance. I was pretty impressed overall with this car. It's been well thought out and designed from every little aspect of it, and it works. And that's easy to see from the way it's been built. Some thought has been put into it. My second favourite was the GLD, and even though I was initially skeptical of the front end, it does work very well balanced. The steering is very good, and again you can see even with the powerful motor turned up. So for the long corner test, I did actually turn the EXP nearly all the way back up to 100%, so you got the full 8,600 kV blasting out, and I could run the car in a straight line if I wanted to, and then force it into a slide just by handbrake turning, and then it would handle the slide and keep going. And that is what I was trying to show in the footage with the high speed drifting with this car. It really did. It also, under speed, the gyro wasn't having to work too hard. I could turn it down and the car would track sideways quite nicely. DRZ version 2. Now I know it sounds like I was being critical of this car initially, but when I was actually driving it, especially on the small drift circuit on the tabletop, it was really easy to drive, very maneuverable, very predictable, and I liked it. Okay, you can see in the odd bit of footage where the wheel lifts, and I think that's just the suspension that needs tuning in, and this is an issue I'm going to have to deal with. I have actually got the monoshock set up for this, which I haven't used yet. I'll do another video on that. So I think the car has got the potential. You could see in the long corner drifts in the comparison video with the XRX that the wheels were shaking a lot. The gyro was having to work hard to stabilize the car. If I turned the gyro down too much, it couldn't do the long drifts. So that's something I think, it's not an inherent problem. I think it just needs fine tuning. But it was a lot harder to get right because of this steering setup issue with the ride height interfering in the way the steering works. But that said, I was very pleased, impressed, and I did enjoy driving it. And it wasn't hard to set up initially to get it to do the little drifts and the skill course. So it's not a bad car. I've not got a problem with it. But if you ask me personally, I prefer the XRX number 1, GLD number 2, and then the DRZ version 2 last of all. I prefer the original version for the front suspension setup. It just looks, it's just more tunable, easier. I think this could benefit from a better gyro. That might help. So maybe the version 2 gyro would be better on this car. But these are all things, tests I've got to conduct. It's already taken enough time just to put this test together with the 3 cars, between building them, testing them, and getting the footage. Even this video is half an hour long, and I really could have gone on for a lot longer and split the video into 3 parts, but it was taking long enough to get this together, and I thought I just wanted to get it out there. So yeah, I have a few misgivings about the flimsiness of the front, but I have seen the hop-up parts are pretty cool for this car, so I think that would take care of some of that. Yes, I think out of the box this is nice that it's got metal parts and metal knuckles. Just in the steering setup needs looking at. And I didn't like the rear diff. One thing worth mentioning that I have forgotten, I can't believe I forgot this. The rear diff on this is locked, so that does make a difference depending on your driving style. I usually prefer an open diff, and that's what these two have, although a slightly more firm diff, but open all the same. Next thing I'm going to be doing is running these on the RCP track, because as you guys know, I love racing these on the RCP track and seeing how each car performs. Yeah, so overall, I mean, the GLD I was actually running with special wheels that have got their own drift tyres. These tyres aren't as good, so I know the GLD's got more in the tank yet, but even then it held its own. So yeah, that's my thoughts, guys. Obviously there's lots of questions still, lots I need to go into in terms of depth and detail. I'll probably end up doing a video on each car eventually, but watch this space, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and I'll see you guys all next time.